Good morning, friends and enemies. In today's video, we're talking the Week 12 waiver wire, as we always do. Every Tuesday, we'll be going through each position on the sleeper trending tab, letting y'all know guys that I'd be picking up, how much fab I'd be dropping on them, and then looking at the trending down tab. So guys that I think that it's okay to just part ways with, to just say goodbye and finish off the rest of the season without them rotting on your bench. Trade deadline is this week. There's also 4 teams on bye. We've got Denver, we've got the Chargers, we've got Miami, and Washington. So keep that in mind. We'll jump right into what I think is the most interesting position this week on the waiver wire, and that is the running back position. Right now, we have Emmanuel Wilson atop the list. We've got some interesting names. A lot of them feel like more 1 week plugins, maybe 2 weeks at the maximum, and that's where we start with Emmanuel Wilson. Now, the reason he finds himself on the waiver wire, obviously, is Josh Jacobs leaves Sunday's game with a knee injury. Now, the good news is it's not season ending. It's not long-term or anything like that. There is actually a chance he could suit up against Minnesota on Sunday per Matt LaFleur. I think that's probably a coin flip. So if Josh Jacobs is out, I think Emmanuel Wilson kind of slots right in as a plug-and-play RB2. It's not a plus-plus matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. They're just a well-rounded defense for the most part, but the Green Bay Packers have a good offense, is an extremely fantasy-friendly position. Obviously, the Green Bay Packers running back position. And once Josh Jacobs went out, Emmanuel Wilson came in and operated as the workhorse, took all the snaps, was getting the carries. He's also pretty good in the passing game. He's got the size, 5'10", 225 pounds. So he could be a workhorse, and I think they've treated him as such. He will be pretty much the bell cow, I think, in this backfield if Josh Jacobs does miss a game. It does sound like worst-case scenario, he'll be back week 13, maybe week 14. That's probably like a bottom 5th percentile outcome there. So I wouldn't expect Emmanuel Wilson to be a long-term plug-and-play guy for you. But if you need a running back right now, I know there are 4 teams on bye. You might have some needs at that position. I think Emmanuel Wilson is a guy that if you're fighting for a playoff spot, you really need an RB2. I think he has a nice floor of probably somewhere in the, the 12-point range, and he gets into the end zone, can give you a top 15, top 12 finish for you. Talking about a top 12 finish, last week, Sean Tucker popped off for 34 PPR points on the back of 140 yards from scrimmage, 3 touchdowns. Now, Sean Tucker kind of overtakes Rachaad White for the most part from a production standpoint, at least. He still is underneath him in terms of snap counts, but that's probably more to do with game script and then fourth quarter having to play catch up. And Rachaad White is definitely the preferred pass catching role, but Sean Tucker is taken on the early down role, goal line, gets involved in the passing game, and is really explosive. Like, he just rips off big plays whenever he's on the NFL field. Unfortunately, 2 things here. We have Bucky Irving, who returned to a limited practice last week. I still think that probably puts him 51-49 in favor of sitting 1 more game, meaning it opens up for Sean Tucker and Rachaad White to play that passing down role for week 12, but they play at LA against the Rams. So they are on the road. They're against one of the tougher defenses in the entire NFL. So I still think this makes it a pretty murky situation, even if Bucky misses this one. So it's easy to get excited about Sean Tucker and what he did last week, the 34 points. And I still think he's very much a viable flex play going into this week, but he's not going to be a guy that I'm ranking top 15 because of the matchup, because of the uncertainty in the committee. Like, if they get down quickly, that does mean Rachaad White probably takes more snaps than Sean Tucker does. It is good to see, though, in a game script that wasn't necessarily like them leading, neutral game script, trailing the fourth quarter, he was still able to walk away with 19 carries. So they obviously trust him in the running game at this point. He is a better runner than Rachaad White is right now. He's still relatively involved in the passing game. So again, Tucker, I think he's probably worth picking up and holding on to for the remainder of the season, because now Bucky's dealing with an injury that's kept him sidelined for like almost 2 months at this point. And maybe he comes back and he's like Pacheco last year, where the injury never really fully healed, or he re-injures it, and then Sean Tucker is a guy down the stretch where they get Arizona, the Saints, the Falcons, the Panthers, Miami. That is an unbelievably easy stretch right there when we're looking at it. Like, now might be a good time to buy any Buccaneer. If you want to buy a discount on Bucky Irving, if the guy who has him wants to get off of him right now, that schedule is beautiful. Ibuka coming off of a couple maybe shaky-ish games, or not looking like the first half guy that he was early in the year. Like, just look at that Tampa Bay schedule. Again, Arizona, New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina, Miami in the fantasy championship. But Tucker should be earned. Again, I don't know that you're going to get more than like an RB2 flex play for outside of just week 12, because week 13 probably feels like a realistic return for Bucky Irving. Speaking of realistic returns, I mean, Jaylen Warren. We have another injured running back here. Kenneth Gainwell just pops whenever Warren is out. Again, it's like the Rico Dowdle effect when all the touches are kind of consolidated here. For Gainwell, the problem is Jaylen Warren's ankle injury is not considered to be serious. It is a low ankle sprain, which I would say way more often than not, the player plays the following week and is pretty much fine. So if he doesn't miss time, Jaylen Warren, then Kenneth Gainwell goes back to being a really low floor player. As you could see, these numbers are PPR. And in the last 4 games, he finished with fewer than 4 PPR points in 3 of those games. And then if Warren's out, obviously Gainwell gets a ton of pass catching work. He'll get the groundwork, but he's kind of useless outside of that. So for me, I'm looking at Gainwell as a guy that's likely not going to be the starter here unless Jaylen Warren misses, which I'm not putting a ton of bank into that. Gainwell needs to be picked up for this week in case Warren does miss, because it's a great matchup against Chicago. But if Warren's back, then I look at Gainwell as, you know, just in that tier of a million guys this year where he's just a high-end handcuff. If the guy in front of him gets hurt, cool. They're also possibly without Aaron Rodgers right now, dealing with a fracture in his non-throwing wrist. He's 50-50 to play as well. He's a guy that gets his running backs involved pretty heavily in the passing game, so we'll see. But Kenneth Gainwell, another one who's maybe a fill-in top 15, top 20 running back for you this week if the starter does not play. But it looks like all these guys are shaping up, again, for 1 week fill-ins kind of at the max right now. The one dude who does feel like he might have some long-term staying power here is bayshul tuten, the rookie who has just been kind of hyped ad nauseum every time he does something good. And then as you can see, every time he does something good, basically nothing comes after it. However, on Sunday against the Chargers, bayshul tuten was out carrying Travis Etienne 15-12 before he had to leave the game with an ankle injury. And like typical Tuten fashion, like he looked good. He looked explosive. He looked powerful. Like, I don't think anyone has a question about like the prospect about who he is as a runner, but I'm not fully buying into like the changing of the guard here. Again, it was 15-12 in carries. It's not like Tuten was the bell cow. It's not like he was the workhorse. This is an offense with Liam Cohen that wants to get the running backs to become kind of the centerpiece of their offense. So I do think there is this long-term upside with Tuten that probably doesn't exist from Emmanuel Wilson, Sean Tucker, Kenneth Gainwell outside of injuries. And obviously I have to bring up the fact that Tuten did tweak his ankle in this game, but it does seem like it's kind of the Jaylen Warren variety where it's a low ankle sprain. He said after the game he's good and should be ready for week 12 against Arizona. And they have a great schedule over the next month: Arizona, Tennessee, Indianapolis, New York Jets there. So 3 out of 4 really plus matchups here. Ultimately, what I think is going to happen is it's going to be a committee on early downs. Tuten, Etienne, like there's no way they just phase Etienne out. Like Etienne did score 2 rushing touchdowns last week. You know, Tuten was out of the game afterwards, but I still think this is very much a hot hand approach. And again, like I think Tuten has long-term upside for the next 5-6 weeks of the season. But if it went in the way where both of them were just getting 40% of the snaps, and then LaQuint Allen was also getting 20% of the snaps, it becomes messy. And it's almost more of like a negative to Travis Etienne than it is someone that I feel really positive about for bayshul tuten. And as you could also see by his reception numbers here, like his season high is 2 catches. And that's just not what his role is. Even if he is a good pass catcher, which he is, he could play all 3 downs. Same thing as Travis Etienne. LaQuint Allen kind of plays that pure pass catching role in this offense. He takes a long down and distance snaps. He takes a 2 and 4 minute drill snaps. So I think it's a little bit more of a volatile situation. People in fantasy right now, like everyone that plays best ball and dynasty, are obsessed with the rookies. And every time one of them has a good game, they want to like go all in on them and be like, oh, it's the breakout coming, even though they're a clear like. It was the same thing with Colson Loveland a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, you know what? He had the breakout game, but it was against Cincinnati. It was without Cole Kmet. And everyone's like, no, this is it. And then he's back to being what he was, you know, the first 8 weeks of the season. Feels a little bit like that with Tuten. I will say there's a little bit going in the other direction where this was not an ETN injury that caused Tuten to get a lot of work up front. So there could be a little bit of a changing of the guard where Tuten maybe does get more carries than ETN going forward, but unless there's an injury to ETN, it's really hard to picture Tuten just like taking control of this backfield. So he's my favorite pickup in terms of like a long-term play. Like I would prefer him over Tucker, Wilson, Gainwell, those guys if I'm looking for a guy that I put on my bench. If you need a 1 week starter, then I would probably look to one of those guys that have an injury ahead of him before Tuten. Chris Rodriguez ran really well, albeit it was against the Miami defense. It looks like he's kind of taken over the starting role over Ja'Cory Krosky-Moret. Prior to the Miami game, had rushing touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. Now, the problem with him is they get a bye in week 12, so you can't use him. You're just stashing him, and then you're hoping he's the starter coming out of the bye. They use Jeremy McNichols on passing downs. As you can see, Chris Rodriguez literally had his first catch of the season against Miami in Madrid. I do think, listen, in good matchups, you could probably play Chris Rodriguez hoping he scores a touchdown. He's kind of like a shitty version of J.K. Dobbins at this point. Well, not at this point, given J.K. Dobbins' status, but early year J.K. Dobbins. But again, they get the bye, and then they get Denver after the bye. They're at Minnesota in week 14. So 2 tough back-to-back matchups. They get the Giants, which is plus, Philly, which is bad, and then Dallas in the championship. So if you could like get to Dallas, even though Dallas looked a lot better against the Raiders last night, but that's probably a Raiders offensive line thing, not a Dallas now is a great defense kind of thing. But Rodriguez will be a guy, I think, that gets 10, 12, 14 carries per game going forward. And in plus matchups, I think he is a flex-worthy player. So if you can stash him and hold on to him for weeks 15 and 17, then do so. But don't go crazy with Chris Rod. Underneath C-Rod, we got Devin Singletary, who's coming off of his 2-touchdown game. Yeah, I mean, listen, him and Tracy are splitting snaps here. They're splitting touches. They have pretty clear defined roles in terms of like different areas of the field or different downs. Tracy's the pass catcher. He gets a lot of early down work. Devin Singletary is the guy that just dominates carries inside the 10 and 5 yard line. I believe he's out carried Tracy inside the 10 yard line 8-0 over the last 3 weeks since Scatabo has gone down. But it's very clear just a 50-50 split here. And I think Singletary is a guy that you definitely don't want in your lineup, especially in bad matchups. But they get Washington at home in week 15. They get Las Vegas in week 17. So he might be worth a stash here. I just don't think you can play him at Detroit in week 12, at New England in week 13, and then a bye in week 14. So I get it. There's a lot of hype coming off of the 2-touchdown game, but he ain't doing that again. And then the next 3 weeks are all buns matchups. So you can't really use him. You're kind of stashing him in hopes of the fantasy playoff. So again, not a guy to overspend on right now. You got Zonavan Knight underneath him. He did end up getting into the end zone against San Francisco. Also had like a 50-yard run called back, so he could have had a much bigger day. We really don't know about Trey Benson. Still haven't heard any updates. I do kind of feel like I'm filming this early. It's like 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning. This feels like a week that we should get a Trey Benson update. So by the time you watch this, we might have more word on Trey Benson maybe returning to practice on a limited basis. The fact that he hasn't got back to any practice yet feels like his week 12 status is probably in jeopardy, I would say. You know, I don't want to rule him out yet, but it could be another week for Zonavan Knight and Amari DiMercato kind of splitting that backfield. So Zonavan Knight, I think he'll end up being like a top 30 running back for me in my rankings this week, just based on his early down role. But again, not a lot of staying power because Trey Benson will eventually return. Jaleel McLaughlin's just going to be fucking annoying in that Denver offense. Sean Payton is going to use another back outside of RJ Harvey. I will say they have their bye in week 12, so it would not surprise me at all if they go out during this 2-week stretch and Sean Payton looks at other veterans to take that like early down big body role, because like Jaleel McLaughlin at 5'7", 187 pounds makes fucking zero negative sense to have that role. So we'll see what Sean Payton does over the bye week. So yeah, I mean, Jaleel's definitely not a guy that I'm like spending any sort of dollars on to stash right now. Let's work backwards to the quarterback position here because we've got a lot of injuries. We've got Michael Penix likely out for the season. Kirk Cousins will take his place. So this is strictly for super flex people out here. If you're hurting at quarterback, which a lot of people are, there's been a lot of injuries, there's been a lot of busts, whatever. Like Kirk Cousins has obviously played terrible this year. And just from the eye test too, like you watch him play, he looks out of sync. He won't have Drake London for probably close to 2, 3, 4 weeks at this point with a PCL sprain. So I don't expect big numbers from him. But we also saw random big games from Kirk last year. Like it wouldn't be crazy to imagine Kirk Cousins just throw for 302 touchdowns against some of the matchups that they have down the stretch. So they have 2 tough matchups in week 14 and 17 against Seattle and the Rams. Outside of that, though, next week they get the Saints inside in the Dome. The week after that, they get the Jets, who don't have Sauce, who don't have Quinnen Williams anymore. They get Tampa Bay in week 15. They get Arizona in week 16. So I would say out of the 6 remaining matchups, he gets 4+ matchups. And hopefully by week 15, 16, Drake London will be back. But again, like if you're hurting for quarterback 2, a streaming guy in Superflex leagues, Kirk Cousins will be the starter for the remainder of the season. So you do have at least some semblance of a floor at QB2 here. Underneath him, we got Tyrod Taylor. We've just heard that he's been announced the starter for the Jets, and I would imagine that's going to be the remainder of the season. Now, they have a really good schedule going forward as well. You got Baltimore, they're going to have to throw the ball. Atlanta at home, Miami at home, New Orleans in week 16 here. The problem is the Jets stink. Garrett Wilson is probably going to be out for the remainder of the season. Maybe he comes back week like 16, 17, whatever. But yeah, I mean, you want to talk about Kirk Cousins without Drake London. Tyrod Taylor without Garrett Wilson is going to be a shit show here. So Tyrod, like you got to be super desperate. And in PPR leagues, I'd imagine there are a lot of wide receivers on the waiver wire that can probably outproduce Tyrod Taylor in the super flex spot. So probably looking elsewhere. Shedeur Sanders likely to get the start on Sunday against the Raiders because Dylan Gabriel remains in concussion protocol, and they typically do not end up getting out of it within 1 week. You're going to want to look elsewhere at your QB2 spot. We'll just leave it at that. Mason Rudolph. We have Aaron Rodgers dealing with a slight fracture in his non-throwing wrist. They are labeling him 50-50 right now to suit up. It's a matter of whether or not he can grip the ball, because sometimes you got to hand the ball off with your left hand, all that kind of stuff. It does matter, obviously. So we'll see if he can play through it. If not, Mason Rudolph will get the start. It's a good matchup against Chicago. Although I will say Chicago's defense is going to get better over the second half of the year. Jalen Johnson returned to practice last week, was eventually ruled out, but he is their all-pro cornerback, and that will be a major, major upgrade to this cornerback room, who's honestly playing pretty well. They got Wright, who's like making plays every single week, regardless, whatever. The Chicago defense will not be a very, very easy one, I don't think, to throw against going forward per se. But Mason Rudolph, I think he'll be, the quarterback, maybe a top 24 quarterback in super flex leagues this week. We got 4 teams on bye, so, people are desperate out there. And then the last one to talk about real quick, I think people are probably done with the Davis Mills train here, but I will say they play on Thursday night against the Buffalo Bills. So I think there's a very, very real chance that CJ Stroud does not clear the concussion protocol. Keep that on your radar. Again, if you need a QB2, Superflex, whatever, and you'd rather start Davis Mills over those other guys that are available and he was dropped or something, he could be a start for you this week. Moving to the wide receiver position. All right, we got Michael Wilstein. Never wrong. Just early as shit. Just so early that it was actually negative to be that early. Therefore, I'm probably wrong. But Michael Wilson comes out and goes nutty last week. 18 targets, 15 catches, 185 yards. You guys have heard the stats at this point. It demolishes anything Marvin Harrison Jr. has done in his time as an Arizona Cardinal. Jacoby Brissett is just slinging the rock. He loves Trey McBride, but clearly trusts Michael Wilson as well. We have Marvin Harrison Jr. returning from appendicitis surgery. That timeline, I can't even begin to tell you what that means. I have no idea when he will be returning. It could be a 1-week absence. It could be a 6-week absence. I don't know. You guys can just go look it up on Twitter or something like that. If we have a doctor in the comments, please enlighten us. But I will say Michael Wilson feels like a rock solid wide receiver 3 for the remainder of the time that Marvin Harrison Jr. is out. You got Jacksonville, you got Tampa Bay, so pretty good matchups over the next couple of weeks. I will say, anytime you get 18 targets, 15 catches, the numbers are going to be skewed a little bit. Jacoby Brissett threw the ball almost 60 times because San Fran got up so quickly in this one. They kind of just went into comeback mode for the remainder of the game. They also just don't really have a running game between Zonavan Knight, Amar DeMarcado, Michael Carter. They trust Jacoby Brissett to throw the ball more than they do trying to rely on their ground game here, which I don't blame them. Brissett playing well. Wilson looks like the clear wide receiver 1 here. Yeah, I think he's a rock solid wide receiver 3. Clearly a ton of upside weekly going forward. And we don't know the absence length for Marvin Harrison Jr. So if Wilson's sitting on your waiver wire right now and you need a receiver, you need a flex option, I would probably drop a significant portion of my fab if I have it left on him. Yeah, somewhere in the 20, 25, 35% range, depending how aggressive your league is. But yeah, Michael Wilson, man, the GOAT. Looking at the rest of the wide receivers that are available in fewer than 50% of leagues, I will just say quickly, Greg Dortch, I think is okay as a slot guy. He'll probably get 5 to 6 targets from Jacoby Brissett, but if they're not in that type of game script, he's not going to be usable. Darnell Mooney, I just think it's unfortunate, again, to have to rehash this, but he needs to be owned. Again, he was a 1,000-yard receiver with Kirk Cousins last year, and he's going to run every single route. I know he's looked horrendous this year. He's dropping passes. He's not making big plays. He's not really separating, and Kirk Cousins has looked bad too. But Darnell Mooney will have his handful of 5 for 60 games over the next month while Drake London is out. Kyle Pitts probably gets a big boost, but listen, Darnell Mooney, unfortunately, he just has to be picked up by you. All right. So he's the other one I'm kind of interested in here. I will make a blanket statement on the Buffalo Bills receivers. People want to talk about them because Josh Allen had a big game. I'm good on that. Each one of them is running 42% of the routes underneath Shakir. I think there's a really good chance Keon Coleman probably returns this upcoming week. So I'm not buying into any of the Buffalo receivers outside of Shakir, Kincaid. Those are the only guys you want to roster from that team. Andrei iosivas, that's going to be way too cute for me. I don't even think he's going to be ranked inside the top 45, even if Jamar Chase's appeal gets upheld. I've been following a lot of the Patriots beat reporters, and they're kind of going back and forth with how they're going to end up covering the Cincinnati receivers if Jamar Chase is out. And a lot of it's basically one of two options. Like they are going to bracket T. Higgins and have Christian Gonzalez shadow Andrei iosivas, which might be the most lopsided matchup in the history of the NFL. Or they're going to do the opposite, where they're just going to bracket Andrei iosivas and have Christian Gonzalez shadow T. Higgins. And surprisingly, a lot of them are thinking that they're just going to bracket T. Higgins with Carlton Davis safety over the top. So double team him and have Christian Gonzalez stay on Andrei iosivas. So not going to be a pretty scene out there for Cincinnati against the Patriots this week. I'm off Andrei iosivas. You want to take that chance, go for it. Not me though. Alec Pierce still only 58% owned. That's ridiculous. Those are all unserious leagues. Christian Watson, like for sure, needs to be owned at this point. 2 touchdowns. He clearly has some chemistry there with Jordan Love. Jordan Love likes taking shots to him. No Tucker Kraft. The targets are getting more and more consolidated. No Josh Jacobs possibly this week. Could have a good game. John Mechie, and I'm pretty good on that Jets passing offense. Jayden Higgins is actually interesting. He's now running the second most routes for the Texans, and CJ Stroud is eventually going to return here. So he's posted good games in 3 out of the last 4. 7 targets or more in 3 out of the last 4. 4 for 55 on Sunday, following a 5 for 42 in a touchdown game the week prior. Buffalo, Indy, KC, Arizona, Vegas, Chargers, like a lot of high-scoring games possibly on the horizon here. So Higgins could be a quiet second half of the year rookie breakout that is starting to see more and more snaps there. So Higgins is a guy that does interest me a bit. I'll tell you what, if this is a week that you need a tight end, you are fucked city, man. AJ Barner, I don't know how many times we want to do this song and dance. 17 points on Sunday against the Rams, 10 catches, 70 yards, following a .3 game. So yeah, I mean, he just does not get volume, as you can see. Like he randomly has spike weeks, but he also has games where he goes 1 for 7, 3 for 24. It's a good matchup against Tennessee, but I also kind of think it's not a good matchup because I think Seattle's just going to run away with this game and probably throw the ball about 7 times in the second half. So I get it. If you want to go Barner, like the rest of these guys on this list, obviously not Andrews, but like Darnell Washington, I'm good there. Brock Wright, absolutely no. Although I will say, the Lions passing game will look a lot better in games where they're not playing at Philly and Jared Goff just had a really, really poor game. They're at home, back in the dome against a weak Giants team. Brock Wright did run 83% of the routes, he played on 83% of the snaps, did get 7 targets in this one. So if he scores a touchdown, I really wouldn't be surprised, obviously, taking Sam Laporta's place against the Giants. So you can do worse than that. The other 2 I will mention quickly, Chig, Okonkwo, because there are injuries to the Tennessee receivers. And I should bring up Alec Ayamaner, who's a guy who hasn't done shit since like week 3. But they are dealing with now Calvin Ridley out for the remainder of the season with a broken fibula, as well as Shamir DK left the game with a chest injury and is in concussion protocol. So very, very unlikely that he ends up playing in week 12. Really tough matchup against Seattle, obviously, but targets will be very consolidated to Chig, Alec Ayamaner, a little bit to Gunnar Helm, a little bit to like fucking Van Jefferson. No more Tyler Lockett there too. So a lot more consolidation. You can make that decision if you want. I'm not going to be going all in on the Tennessee offense, but thought I should bring it up. And then you got Brenton Strange. That's the other guy that I'm actually a little bit excited about. Like I'm not excited about the Jaguars passing offense, obviously, but with no Travis Hunter, Brenton Strange did return to practice last week on a limited basis. So feels like this is likely the week that he returns. And again, they get a really good string of the next 4 games. It's Arizona, Tennessee, Indy should be high scoring, and then the New York Jets. So 4+ matchups. Brenton Strange was the guy who was running nearly 80% of the routes in the beginning of the season. Started coming on really, really strong, was the starter there. I think Strange is going to be a nice piece for this offense and should give you a nice floor of like, 8-9 points in that fantasy tight end spot if you are really desperate. And I prefer him to most of the guys on the wire. So yeah, we'll move over to the trending down tab and, just run through guys that I would drop or not drop. JCM, genuinely think he's droppable at this point. They got a bye. They get some tough matchups. Chris Rodriguez is a starter. Davis, droppable. Kamani Vidal, definitely not droppable until we know Omarion Hampton's return date. And even then, I'd hold on to him. Blake Corum wouldn't drop. Rashad White wouldn't drop. Ramondre Stevenson definitely wouldn't drop. Brian Robinson, high end handcuff, doesn't have standalone value, so you can do with that what you want. Tony Pollard, he's becoming dangerously close to droppable territory. Seattle, Jacksonville, Cleveland, San Fran, KC, like that lineup is terrible. So listen, I don't know that I'd blame you if you wanted to use the roster spot elsewhere on Tony Pollard. Rodriguez, no, would not drop. Rashard Smith is droppable. Pacheco might return this week, so I probably wouldn't drop him. Kyle Manungai, wouldn't drop him either. Wide receivers, Parker Washington would hold on to him. Jacksonville's game script just got away, and it was just all running back production last week. But they play Arizona and Jacoby Brissett this week, Tennessee the week after, Indy again. Schedule. Wouldn't drop Parker Washington. We don't know if Brian Thomas Jr. is returning. Shamir Decay, droppable. Ridley, droppable. Jerry Jeudy, pretty much always droppable. Had one fucking good game. Everyone up in arms. But they do get a pretty favorable schedule going forward. Raiders, San Fran, Tennessee, Chicago. So next month of the season, but quarterback situation is a mess. So you got to be really desperate to be throwing Jerry Jeudy out there. Keon Coleman droppable. Naylor droppable. Johnson definitely not. Calvin Austin, yeah, like you definitely don't need to hold on to him. Darius Slayton, don't know what his status is. I would hold on to him. I think when he's playing, he's a decent flex play for you. Malik droppable. Tez absolutely not. Olamide Zaccheaus droppable. Matthew Golden, yeah, I mean, listen, like he's scored 8 or fewer points in the last 4 games. He has now played on fewer than 40% of snaps in each of the last 2 games that he's played. Jayden Reed will be returning soon, so I get it if you want to drop him. No hard feelings. Kendrick Bourne, we've got the return of all the receivers and the tight ends. He is probably droppable there. Marvin Mims, always droppable. Khalil Shakir, do not drop. Lockett, you can drop. Xavier Worthy, a lot of spite drops, I'm assuming there, but yeah, I would not drop him. Tight end's the only one I would really point out, like Luke Musgrave. I hate his fucking ass. Can absolutely drop him. Yeah, that's really it. All right, well, very long waiver wire this week. A lot of guys to talk about. I hope this was helpful to y'all. As always, my waiver wire rankings are available to you on bdge.co. It's got them in order of exactly who I would prioritize, how much fab I would drop on each one of them in particular. So if you want to go see that, you can sign up to be a Big Dog member at bdge.co. The cheapest way to get that membership, you can get it for 3 months for free by going to our partner website, MGM or the MGM app. If you deposit for the first time using code BDGE when you do so, just $10 or more, play any slip on that site. And as soon as you do so, they're going to hit you with a promo code to use on our website for 3 months free, the Big Dog membership, waiver wire rankings, weekly sit start rankings, weekly private Q&A. All right. Love y'all. Thank you for hanging out with me today. Smoochies. Mwah.